Hey everyone! Welcome back to the Easy English Spark channel. I'm so excited to have you here today. In this video, we'll dive into an inspiring journey about Lena, a girl who faces many challenges but learns to build her confidence and find her voice. Along the way, we'll also be focusing on improving your English listening and speaking skills. This story will give you valuable insights into personal growth, overcoming fears, and speaking confidently in English. So, sit back, relax, and let's take this journey together while enhancing your English skills every step of the way. Let's get started. Chapter 1. Why I Didn't Go to School. Hi, my name is Lena, and I'm not your average 10-year-old girl. I know I'm different from the other kids in many ways. I do the usual things that kids my age enjoy, like eating ice cream, riding my bike, around the neighborhood, and even playing video games. But when I look inside, I don't feel all that different. I feel just like everyone else. The problem, though, is that everyone else doesn't see me the way I see myself. You see, when I walk outside, I notice people staring at me. It's not the kind of stare that shows curiosity or friendliness. It's the kind of look that makes me feel like I don't belong, like I'm not supposed to be there. I get it. I don't look like everyone else. People don't always know how to react when they see me, and I can tell by their expressions that they're uncomfortable. It's not just kids either. It's adults too. People avoid looking at me for too long, almost like they're afraid. They might say something wrong or do something inappropriate. I don't blame them. I know I don't look normal, whatever that means. I'm not going to go into detail about how I look, but let's just say it's not the kind of face you see every day. It's not the kind of face that blends in with everyone else. But it's my face. And even though it doesn't look like the faces you're used to seeing, it's still mine. I've learned to live with it, but that doesn't mean it's easy. For years, I've stayed at home, away from the world outside. I've been homeschooled by my mom, who has done her best to make sure I get an education. But as much as I love her for that, it hasn't been the same. I haven't had the chance to meet other kids, to experience school, or to make friends. I've always wanted to go to school, just to be like everyone else. But there was always something holding me back. The truth is, it's not just how I look that's kept me from school. I've had to deal with a lot of health problems. I've been in and out of the hospital more times than I can count. I've had surgery after surgery, each one trying to fix something, trying to make me look more normal. But no matter how many surgeries I've had, I still don't feel normal. I've spent more time in hospital rooms than I'd like to admit, and I've missed out on so many things because of it. I've had over 20 surgeries in my life, and each one was supposed to help me look better or feel better. But they never really fixed everything. There's only so much a doctor can do. It's not like I can just walk out of the hospital and suddenly be like all the other kids. It doesn't work like that. But recently, something changed. For the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe I was ready. My last surgery was about 8 months ago, and after that, the doctors said I wouldn't need to return for another 2 years. That was huge for me. It meant I wouldn't be going back to the hospital anytime soon. And for the first time, I felt like maybe I could do something that felt normal. One day, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. They didn't know I was listening, but I could hear them discussing the idea of sending me to school. My mom said something about whether or not I was ready. "Do you think she's ready to go to school?" she asked my dad. My dad replied, "I don't know. Maybe. But it's up to her, really." I felt my heart race. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. My chance to go to school, to finally be a part of the world outside. I wanted to say something, to tell them how I felt, but I wasn't sure what to say. What if I wasn't ready? What if the other kids didn't want to be friends with me? What if they stared at me just like everyone else did? That night, I lay in bed, thinking about it. My mind was racing. I wanted to go to school, I really did. But I didn't know if I was ready. I didn't know if I could handle it. I wasn't sure I could face all those people who would look at me and whisper to each other, the way I had seen them do before. The next morning, my mom asked me gently, "Do you think you're ready for school?" I paused. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to be brave and tell her that I was ready, but the words stuck in my throat. "I don't know," I finally said. "I don't know if I'm ready." Mom gave me a small smile, as if she understood. "It's okay, Lena. We'll talk about it more later, but just know that we think you can do it." Later that week, my parents took me to visit the school, Riverside Academy, which was just down the street. I had no idea what to expect. I was nervous and excited at the same time. I wanted to see the school, but at the same time, I didn't want to face the reality of what it might be like. When we arrived, we were greeted by the principal, Mr. Green, a kind-looking man with glasses and a warm smile. He shook my mom's hand, then mine, and welcomed us into his office. "Hello, Lena," he said, looking at me with a smile. "It's nice to meet you. Your mom and dad have told me a lot about you." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and said, "Hi." Mr. Green seemed to understand that I was nervous, and he didn't push me to speak too much. He gave us a tour of the school, and we walked through the hallways where I could hear the sounds of kids laughing and talking. It was a strange feeling, being surrounded by so many kids, but still feeling so out of place. After the tour, Mr. Green said, "We have some great teachers here, and I'm sure you'll do just fine, Lena." I didn't know if I believed him, but I was willing to try. I knew that I couldn't stay in my little bubble forever. It was time for me to step out, to face the world, and see if I could make a place for myself in it. But as I walked out of the school that day, I couldn't help but feel a little scared. What would it be like? Would the other kids be kind to me, or would they stare like they always did? I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a small spark of hope. Maybe school would be a chance for me to finally be who I really am, without all the judgments and looks from strangers. Maybe, just maybe, it would be a place where I could fit in. Chapter 2. The First Day of School. The day I'd been both dreading and looking forward to finally arrived. My first day of school. I had spent the whole summer thinking about it, worrying about it, and even dreaming about it. But nothing could have prepared me for what it would actually feel like. My parents woke me up early that morning, just as the sun was starting to peek through the curtains. I was still in bed, tangled in my blankets, feeling the weight of nerves in my stomach. I was excited, yes, but mostly I was terrified. What would it be like? What would the other kids think of me? Would I fit in? All these questions rushed through my mind, making my heart race faster than ever. "Lena, honey, it's time to wake up," Mom called softly, pushing the door open. "You're going to be great today." I didn't feel like I was going to be great. I felt like I was about to walk into a completely new world, one that might not be kind to someone like me. I got up slowly, rubbing my eyes, and went to the bathroom to wash my face. The mirror reflected a face that still felt like a stranger's. I had done my best to get ready, brushing my hair and putting on the school uniform Mom had bought for me, but I still felt different. I knew my face was the first thing people would notice. I knew the looks would come, even if they didn't want to show them. I just didn't know how I was going to handle it. "Are you ready, sweetie?" Mom asked when I came downstairs. She was already dressed and had a big smile on her face, but I could see the worry in her eyes, too. I nodded. "I think so." "Come on, let's go," Dad said, giving me a quick hug. "It's going to be a good day, I promise." They didn't know how I was feeling, but I appreciated their optimism. I wanted to believe them, but fear kept creeping in. We left the house, and the walk to Riverside Academy felt longer than it should have. The streets were quiet, and the morning air was cool, but every step I took felt heavy. We passed the same trees and houses we always saw, but today they felt different, like everything was suddenly unfamiliar. When we arrived at school, there were already a few kids standing outside, chatting with their parents. I could feel my heartbeat thudding in my chest. My parents were walking beside me, but I couldn't help but look at the kids around me. They seemed so confident, laughing and talking like they already knew each other. I felt like an outsider just standing there. "Remember," Mom said, squeezing my hand. "Take a deep breath. You're going to do just fine." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. We walked into the school building, and immediately the noise hit me. The sound of kids running, talking, laughing. It was overwhelming. The hallway was crowded, and I couldn't help but notice that every single person seemed to be moving in a hurry, like they knew exactly where they were going. I, on the other hand, felt lost in the sea of faces. "Okay, Lena," Dad said gently. "Your class is in room 203. It's down the hall, third door on the right." I took a deep breath and walked with them to the classroom. The closer we got, the more I felt the nerves twisting in my stomach. When we reached the door, Mom gave me one last hug. "You've got this," she said softly. And then, before I could say anything back, they left, heading to the waiting area. I was alone. I stepped inside the classroom. The walls were decorated with colorful posters, and there were rows of desks filled with kids, most of them already chatting with each other. They all turned to look at me when I walked in. I could feel their eyes on me immediately. I wanted to hide, to turn around and walk out, but I couldn't. I had to do this. At the front of the classroom, the teacher, Mrs. Scott, stood with a warm smile on her face. "Hello, Lena. Welcome to our class," she said kindly, though I could tell she was nervous too. I wasn't the only one who felt awkward. She asked me to sit at an empty desk near the back of the room. I walked toward the desk slowly, trying not to draw too much attention to myself. As I sat down, I could feel eyes still following me. I kept my head down, hoping the day would pass quickly. I didn't know anyone in the class. Everyone else seemed to have friends, talking in little groups, laughing and sharing stories. I sat there, alone, trying not to feel the sting of loneliness. The room felt so big and unfamiliar, and I just wanted to disappear into the desk. But then, something happened. Sophie, a girl from the row in front of me, turned around and smiled at me. "Hey," she said, her voice soft but friendly. "I'm Sophie. You're Lena, right?" I was so surprised that someone actually spoke to me. It was like a small light in the middle of all the darkness. I nodded quickly. "Yeah, that's me. I sit near you. If you need help with anything today, just ask me," she offered with a genuine smile. I smiled back, a little relieved. "Thanks." The bell rang, signaling the start of class, and Mrs. Scott began talking about the rules and the subjects we'd be learning. I tried my best to focus, but it was hard. Every few minutes I would catch someone looking at me, and I couldn't help but wonder what they were thinking. Were they judging me? Were they staring because they thought I was different? It felt like I couldn't escape the attention. Lunchtime came, and I followed the other students to the cafeteria. I felt a pit form in my stomach. The cafeteria was crowded, and the noise was overwhelming. I grabbed my tray and stood at the end of the line, not knowing where to go. Everyone else seemed to know exactly where they were sitting, talking and laughing with their friends. "Is this seat taken?" a voice suddenly asked. I looked up to see Sophie standing there holding her tray. She smiled at me again. "You can sit with me if you want," she said. "I was looking for you." I could hardly believe it. Sure. Thanks," I said quickly, my voice shaking a little. We found a seat at one of the empty tables. As we sat down, I felt a little more at ease. Sophie was friendly, and she didn't seem to care about my face. She just treated me like anyone else, and that made all the difference. As we ate, we started talking. I learned that Sophie liked to read, just like I did, and that she was in the same class as me last year. She told me about her favorite books, and we laughed about some of the things that happened in the class. It felt nice to have someone to talk to, someone who wasn't staring at me or treating me differently. The rest of the day passed in a blur. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but by the time school ended, I felt like I had made it through. I wasn't sure what the next day would bring, but for the first time, I felt a little bit more at home. Maybe school wasn't as bad as I thought. And maybe, just maybe, I could find my place here after all. Chapter 3. The First Feeling. The first few days of school felt like a blur. I was still adjusting to everything: the noise, the crowded hallways, the unfamiliar faces. Every morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach, a feeling of unease settling deep inside me. But I tried to remind myself that I was doing something important, something I had wanted for so long. I was finally in school, and even if it felt overwhelming, it was a step toward something bigger. I could feel the eyes on me wherever I went. When I walked down the hall, I could hear whispers, and I knew that people were talking about me. I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on what I was doing, like I was just like everyone else. But it wasn't always easy. It wasn't just the kids in my class. It was the older students, too. I could see them staring at me, and I could hear them whispering when I passed by. I hated it. I hated the feeling of being different, of knowing that people saw me and thought there was something wrong with me. But there were small moments that made me feel a little bit better. Sophie continued to be kind, and she sat with me every day, at lunch. She didn't act like I was any different from anyone else, and that was a relief. I found myself looking forward to lunch, just to see her smiling face. At least I had one person who didn't judge me, who just saw me for who I was on the inside, not the way I looked. Even so, it was hard. On the third day, we had gym class, and I was dreading it. I wasn't good at sports, and I knew I'd stand out for all the wrong reasons. As we walked into the gym, I felt a surge of panic. The room was huge, filled with kids who all seemed to know what they were doing. Some were already laughing and joking with their friends, while others were warming up for the activities. I didn't know where to go or what to do. I stood at the edge of the gym, feeling out of place, wishing I could just disappear into the walls. "Lena, you okay?" Sophie's voice broke through my thoughts. She was standing next to me, looking concerned. "Yeah," I replied, though I didn't feel okay at all. I tried to put on a brave face, but it didn't work. My heart was pounding in my chest. "I'll stay with you," Sophie said firmly. "We'll stick together." I nodded, grateful for her presence. As we lined up with the rest of the class, I felt a little less alone. But when it came time to play, I could see that some of the other kids were avoiding me. They didn't want to pass the ball to me, and when I tried to join a game, they looked at me like I was a distraction. It wasn't that they were being mean, they just didn't know how to handle someone like me. I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They didn't want to make things awkward, but in the end, they did. I sat on the sidelines for most of the game, trying not to let it get to me, but I couldn't help it. The loneliness crept back in, and I started to feel like I was invisible in the worst way possible. I wasn't part of the group. I wasn't part of anything. That afternoon, I sat in the cafeteria, poking at my food. Sophie was talking to me, but I wasn't really listening. I was too caught up in my own thoughts, wondering if I'd ever be able to feel like I belonged. I watched the other kids laughing and chatting, and I felt that familiar ache in my chest, the ache of knowing that no matter how hard I tried, I would never be the same as them. I wasn't just different. I was an outsider. I didn't have the same kind of face, the same kind of life, the same experiences. As I sat there, I noticed Jack, one of the boys from my class, walking by. He glanced at me for a moment, then looked away quickly. I couldn't tell if it was because he didn't want to stare or if it was because he didn't know what to say. I felt a wave of embarrassment wash over me. Maybe he was just as uncomfortable as everyone else. Maybe I was the problem. But then, something unexpected happened. Jack stopped. He turned back around and walked up to my table. "Hey," he said, sitting down across from me. "Mind if I join you?" I stared at him, unsure of what to say. I wasn't used to anyone choosing to sit with me, especially after I'd been ignored by so many other kids. Was he really just being nice? Or was he doing it because he felt sorry for me? "I don't mind," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jack smiled, and for a moment, I felt a small spark of hope. He wasn't treating me like I was different. He wasn't acting like he was doing me a favor. He was just being normal. "Cool," he said. "I noticed you're kind of on your own. I don't really like sitting with the others, so I thought I'd come hang out with you." I was taken aback. For the first time in a while, someone didn't treat me like a charity case. Someone just wanted to talk to me. And that simple act of kindness made all the difference. We talked for the rest of lunch. Jack asked me about my favorite books, and I told him about the stories I loved to read. We laughed about how terrible the food in the cafeteria was, and for the first time, that day I didn't feel like everyone was looking at me. I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like I was just talking to a normal person, and that was enough. As the day went on, I felt a little lighter. I still had moments when the anxiety crept back in, when I caught someone looking at me, or when I felt that familiar feeling of not fitting in. But I also realized something important. Not everyone saw me the way I feared they did. Some people, like Sophie and Jack, didn't care about my face. They cared about who I was. And that meant more to me than anything else. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, but I wasn't as scared as I had been in the morning. The day hadn't been perfect, far from it, but it had shown me something I hadn't seen before. There were people who saw me, really saw me, and they didn't care about how I looked. They cared about who I was inside. And that was the first real feeling I had in school, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, I could find my place here. Chapter 4. Family and Friends. I had always known my family loved me, but as I stepped into this new chapter of my life, things felt a little different. It wasn't that my family had changed, it was that I had changed, and the world outside, my little bubble had changed too. School was not the place where I could hide away from all the feelings I didn't want to face. There, I was forced to confront everything, my fears, my loneliness, and the way I saw myself. But the one constant, the one thing that still felt solid, was my family. They were always there for me, and even though they didn't always know what I was going through, I could feel their love and support in everything they did. It was late, in the evening, after my second week of school, when I finally found some time to sit down with Clara, my older sister. Clara had always been the one person I could count on to understand me. She had a way of reading me, even when I wasn't saying anything. I had always admired her for that. But over the past few days, I noticed something. Clara had been quieter than usual. I didn't know if it was just me, but I could sense that. She was upset, or maybe even frustrated. That night she came into my room, sitting at the edge of my bed. I was reading a book, my mind distracted by all the thoughts swirling in my head. When she spoke, her voice was softer than I expected. "Lena," she said, her eyes avoiding mine. "How's school going?" I paused, looking at her. She wasn't asking because she didn't care. She was asking because she wanted to know the truth. But I wasn't sure how to answer. Part of me wanted to tell her everything, to spill all my worries about how I felt like an outsider, how people still stared at me, and how I wasn't sure I could keep going, but I didn't. "I don't know," I said slowly. "It's okay, I guess. I mean, I'm making some friends, I think. Sophie's nice." Clara nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced by my words. "You're not really telling me how you feel, Lena. You don't have to keep it all to yourself. You know you can talk to me about anything." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't realize how much I had been keeping inside. I had been so focused on getting through the days at school, on putting on this brave face for the outside world, that I had forgotten how to really open up to my own sister. I took a deep breath and closed the book I had been reading, setting it aside. "I feel like I'm not part of anything," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like everyone sees me and thinks I'm different, and I don't know how to change that." Clara was silent for a moment, her gaze softening. I could see that she was processing my words, trying to understand where I was coming from. Finally, she spoke. "You know, she said slowly. I've been feeling like I'm not part of anything, too. Her voice cracked slightly, and I could tell she wasn't just talking about me. It's hard when it feels like all the attention is on you, Lena, when it feels like no one is really paying attention to me. Like I'm invisible. Her words took me by surprise. I hadn't realized that Clara felt that way. After all, she was my older sister. She had always been so strong, always been the one to help me when I was sick or scared. I never imagined she might feel overlooked or left out, especially by our parents. I don't know what to say, I whispered, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. Clara shook her head. You don't have to say anything, Lena. I want you to know that I see you. I see how hard you're trying, and I see how strong you are. But I also want you to know that I'm here for you. And it's okay to need me, okay? I nodded, feeling the tears well up in my eyes. It wasn't just her words that moved me. It was the way she said them. It was the way she showed me that she wasn't just my sister who took care of me, but someone who cared about my feelings, too. In that moment, I felt like I wasn't alone, even though everything else in my life felt so uncertain. You're not invisible, Clara, I said quietly. I see you too, and I love you. Clara smiled, a small, bittersweet smile. She leaned over and hugged me tightly, and I could feel all the tension and the loneliness I had been carrying melt away just for a moment. It felt like we were finally in sync, like the walls between us had come down. The next day, I woke up feeling a little lighter. School was still hard. The stares, the whispers, the feeling of being different. They hadn't disappeared. But for the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. I had Clara, someone who understood me, even if she didn't always know exactly what I was going through. And I had Sophie too. Someone who made me feel like I was worth something, like I mattered, no matter how I looked. At lunch that day, Sophie came up to me with a big smile on her face, and for the first time in a while, I felt excited about the day ahead. Sophie had become one of my closest friends in such a short time, and that meant the world to me. She was always there for me, whether it was sitting with me at lunch, helping me with schoolwork, or just talking about random things to make me laugh. She never treated me like I was different, and I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I had felt at first. I started to understand that it wasn't just about how other people saw me. It was about how I saw myself. And when I looked at my family, I saw love, support, and strength. They were the foundation I needed to build myself up, and as long as I had them by my side, I knew I could face whatever challenges came my way. After school that day, Mom and Dad were waiting for me at the front door. They smiled at me, and I could tell they were just as eager to hear how my day had gone. "How was school today, sweetie?" Dad asked, his voice full of warmth. "It was good," I said, trying my best to sound confident. "I had a good day. Sophie and I talked a lot. See? Mom said, her eyes twinkling. We told you it would get better. I smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over me. My parents didn't always understand exactly what I was going through, but they were always there, always ready to support me. That meant more than I could ever explain. I'm glad you're doing well, Dad said. Just remember, we're always here for you. I know, I said quietly. Thanks for everything. As I walked up to my room, I thought about Clara, Sophie, and my parents. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a place to belong. I wasn't just Lena, the girl with a face that made people stare. I was Lena, with a family that loved me and friends who saw me for who I really was. And that was enough. Chapter 5. New Friends. The days that followed felt like they were filled with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. I had made it through the first few weeks of school, and while it wasn't easy, I was starting to adjust. I was still nervous about walking into the classroom each day, still conscious of the way people looked at me, but something had shifted inside me. I no longer felt completely alone, and that more than anything made me feel like I could take on whatever came next. It was during one of those days, a Thursday, that I met Maya and Tristan, two kids who would become the kind of friends I hadn't known I needed. It all started in the school library. After finishing lunch, I decided to spend the extra time before the next class looking for a new book to read. I'd always loved books, the way they could take you to a different world, away from the stares and whispers of reality. It was my escape. As I walked through the rows of books looking for something new, I noticed Maya sitting at one of the tables by the window, reading a book. She had short, curly hair and bright green eyes that seemed to sparkle whenever she looked up from her pages. She was the type of girl who didn't seem afraid to be herself, confident, comfortable in her own skin. She glanced up as I walked past, and for a moment, I felt the familiar pang of nervousness. Was she going to stare at me? Was she going to judge me like so many others did? But then she did something unexpected. She smiled. It was a small, friendly smile, the kind that made me feel like maybe I wasn't as different as I thought. I hesitated for a second, unsure if I should respond, but then I decided to take a chance. "Hi," I said, my voice a little shaky but stronger than I thought it would be. "Hey, Lena, right?" Maya said, putting down her book. "I'm Maya. I saw you in class. You like to read too?" I nodded, surprised that she knew my name. "Yeah, I love reading," I said, my smile growing a little more. "Do you have any recommendations?" Maya's eyes lit up. "Definitely. I've read a ton of books lately. If you like fantasy, I've got some great suggestions." She started listing off titles, and we quickly fell into an easy conversation about our favorite books. I was surprised at how easy it was to talk to her. It felt like I could relax for the first time all week. As we continued talking, Tristan walked into the library. He was a bit taller than Maya, with messy brown hair and glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He looked around the room, spotted us, and made his way over. I didn't know him very well yet, but I'd seen him around school. He wasn't as outgoing as Maya, but he seemed nice enough. "Hey, Maya, who's your new friend?" Tristan asked. As he approached, a friendly grin on his face. "This is Lena," Maya said, glancing at me. "She's into reading, just like me." Tristan nodded in greeting. "Nice to meet you, Lena. I'm Tristan. You like fantasy too?" I nodded. "Yeah, I do." We started talking about books, and soon it felt like we had been friends for years. We shared recommendations, talked about characters we loved, and debated which authors were the best. The more we talked, the more I realized that Maya and Tristan weren't like the others. They didn't see me as someone who was different. They saw me for who I was, just like any other kid who loved reading. After a while, Maya looked at me and said, "You should come sit with us at lunch tomorrow. We usually sit at the back of the cafeteria. You'll fit right in." I didn't know what to say at first. The thought of sitting with new people, especially after all the awkwardness I'd felt in the past, made me nervous. But there was something about Maya and Tristan that made me feel safe, like I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't. "Okay," I said, a little unsure but excited at the same time. "I'll come." The next day, I walked into the cafeteria, heart pounding in my chest. I was still anxious, still worried about what the other kids might think. But when I saw Maya and Tristan waving at me from the back of the cafeteria, I felt a rush of relief. I walked over to their table and they immediately made space for me. As I sat down, I felt the tension leave my body. Maya grinned. "Told you we'd make room for you." We started talking again, laughing and sharing stories about the books we had been reading. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was part of something. It wasn't perfect, and I still had moments when I felt out of place, but I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. I felt like I belonged. After that, I started sitting with Maya and Tristan every day. At lunch, we would talk about books, movies, and even what we were learning in class. Sometimes we'd play games or just joke around. And every time we did, I could feel the walls I had built around myself slowly start to come down. One afternoon, after school, Maya and Tristan invited me to hang out at the park. I wasn't sure if I should go. I had never really hung out with friends outside of school before, and I didn't know if I was ready for that. But I didn't want to miss out on the chance to be with people who made me feel accepted. So I said yes. We met at the park later that afternoon, and it felt like the best decision I had made in a long time. We walked around the park, laughing and talking about anything and everything. We played a game of soccer. Well, sort of, mostly, just kicked the ball around. And I actually had fun. I wasn't worried about how I looked or if anyone was staring at me. For once, I was just Lena, having fun with my new friends. As the sun began to set, we sat on the grass, watching the sky change colors. Maya turned to me and said, "You know, Lena, I'm really glad you came today." "Me too," Tristan added, nodding. "It's nice to have someone who actually likes the things we like." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. I had finally found something I had been searching for. A group of people who accepted me, who didn't care about how I looked or how different I was. They liked me for me, and in that moment, I realized something. Maybe I wasn't so different after all. Maybe, just maybe, I could be part of something bigger than myself. I could have friends. I could belong. That was the start of something new. For me, I had found my place and I wasn't going to let it go. Chapter 6. Struggles. The days that followed weren't as easy as I had hoped. It wasn't that I didn't enjoy spending time with Maya and Tristan. I did. It was just that the world around me hadn't changed as much as I had wanted it to. The stares were still there. The whispers still echoed in the hallways. I couldn't escape them, no matter how hard I tried. I had thought that after I made some friends, everything would start to feel better. I figured that as long as I had Maya, Tristan, and the other kids who accepted me, things would get easier. But reality wasn't so simple. There were still moments when I felt like an outsider, when the world around me seemed to remind me of just how different I was. One of the toughest things I had to deal with was the way some of the older kids treated me. Most of the time, I could brush it off. I could ignore the stares, act like I didn't hear the comments, and move on. But there were days when it felt impossible to ignore. It was like everything about me, everything I had been working so hard to accept, was suddenly under a microscope. It happened one afternoon during recess. I was sitting with Maya and Tristan near the edge of the playground, talking about our latest book recommendations. The sun was out, the air was warm, and everything felt good for a moment. But then I saw them, Julian and his friends, walking toward us. Julian was one of those kids who seemed to always have a crowd around him, always ready to make a joke or pull a prank. He was the kind of kid who wanted to be the center of attention. At first, I didn't think much of him. I had seen him around, and he had never really spoken to me directly. But I could feel him staring as he and his group passed by. I tried to ignore it. I had gotten used to people looking at me, and I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing it bothered me. But then, Julian said something. "What's with her face?" he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Is she some kind of monster?" I froze. My stomach sank and I could feel my face burn. Maya and Tristan were quiet, and I could see the way their faces twisted in discomfort. They didn't know what to do, didn't know how to react, but I could tell they wanted to say something to him, to defend me. But I didn't want them to. I didn't want anyone to fight my battles for me, even though I knew that wasn't right. "Shut up, Julian," Maya said, her voice sharp. "That's not cool." Tristan looked uncomfortable, too. "Yeah, Julian, knock it off." But Julian just laughed, turning to his friends who snickered along with him. "What? You're sticking up for her now?" he said, still laughing. Why? Are you afraid she's going to eat you? The comments kept coming, each one hitting me harder than the last. I could feel my heart racing, my hands shaking. I wanted to get up and walk away, to run back to the safety of my house, my room where I didn't have to deal with this. But I couldn't. I couldn't just run away every time someone made fun of me. For a long moment, I sat there, staring at the ground, trying to hold back tears. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to show them how much it hurt. But it did. It hurt more than I thought it could. Julian's words dug into me, and I couldn't shake them off. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to sink into the ground and just vanish. "Lena, don't listen to him," Tristan said, his voice gentle. He reached over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "He's just being a jerk." I nodded, but inside, it didn't feel that simple. It didn't feel like just some rude comment from a kid. It felt like something deeper, like the whole world had decided I wasn't good enough. Like there was something wrong with me that couldn't be fixed, no matter how much I tried. The rest of the recess passed in a blur. I didn't really hear much of what Maya and Tristan were saying, my mind still replaying Julian's words over and over again. It felt like everyone around me was staring at me, even though I knew they weren't. It was just the way I felt, like I couldn't escape the fact that I was different. When the bell rang and we all went back inside for our next class, I felt exhausted. It wasn't just from the physical activity, it was the emotional weight of it all, the feeling of being constantly judged, constantly watched, like there was always someone waiting to tear me down. And that day, Julian's words had hit me, harder than they ever had before. The rest of the day dragged on. I sat through classes, tried to focus, but it felt impossible. I kept thinking about what Julian had said, and it clouded my thoughts. I was supposed to be learning, supposed to be making progress, but all I could do was replay his words, like a broken record in my mind. When I got home that afternoon, I went straight to my room. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to face anyone. I just needed to be alone. I lay on my bed, staring up at the ceiling, feeling like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. I thought about what Julian had said, about how he had called me a monster. I thought about how no matter what I did, no matter how much I tried to fit in, I would always be different. It wasn't until later that night, after dinner, that I finally opened up to Mom. I hadn't said anything to her about what happened at school, but she could tell something was wrong. She always could. She sat down next to me on the couch, looking at me with concern. "Lena," she said softly, "you've been quiet all evening. What happened?" I hesitated, not sure if I should tell her. But the words just came out, like a dam breaking open. I told her about Julian's comments, about how he had made fun of me in front of everyone, how it had felt like the entire school was laughing at me. Mom listened quietly, her hand gently resting on my arm. When I finished, she looked at me, her eyes filled with love and sympathy. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I know it's hard. People can be cruel, and sometimes they say things that aren't true. But you are not what they say you are. You are kind. You are strong, and you are so much more than the way you look. You have so much to offer this world." I wiped my eyes, still feeling the sting of the words Julian had said, but hearing my mom's voice, feeling her embrace, gave me a small sense of comfort. "It's hard," I whispered. "It feels like I'll never be good enough." Mom shook her head. "Lena, you are already enough. You don't need to change for anyone. You are enough, just as you are." Her words didn't immediately make everything better. The pain from what happened at school didn't vanish in an instant. But in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't alone. I had my family and I had my friends. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to help me face the next challenge, whatever it was. The road ahead would still be difficult. There would still be moments where I felt like I didn't belong, where I felt different, where people made comments. That hurt. But I had learned something important that day. I could get through it. I wasn't defined by what others said. I was defined by who I was on the inside, and that was something that no one could take away from me. Chapter 7. Life at School. Life at school was a strange mix of hope and frustration. There were days when it felt like I was finally finding my place, slowly carving out a space for myself in the crowd. And then there were days when it seemed like the world around me was determined to remind me that I was different. It was exhausting, both mentally and emotionally, but it was my reality now. And no matter how much I wanted to escape it, I couldn't. It had been a few weeks since the incident with Julian, and while it still hurt when I thought about it, I was trying my best to move on. I had Maya and Tristan, who had become my closest friends. They were always there for me, sitting with me at lunch, helping me with schoolwork, and making me laugh when I needed it most. I started to look forward to school, not because it was easy, but because I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Maya. Tristan and I had started walking to class together every day. It felt good to have someone by my side, someone who didn't look at me with judgment. We would joke around in the hallways, and though I still felt the occasional sting from the stares and whispers of other students, it wasn't as bad when I was with them. They made me feel like I could survive this. I could get through school and all the difficulties it brought with it. But then there were those moments when the old feelings would creep back in. It happened most often in the cafeteria, where I could feel eyes on me as I sat at our table with Maya and Tristan. I knew people were still talking about me, still whispering behind my back. I knew that some of them still thought of me as different, as the girl with the strange face. But what bothered me more than the whispers was the fact that I could never quite shake the feeling that I was never fully accepted. I would see other groups of kids laughing together, talking in their own private worlds, and I would wonder if I'd ever really fit in. Sure, I had friends now, but part of me longed for something more. I wanted to be part of a group that didn't feel like an effort, that didn't feel like I had to prove myself. I didn't want to always be the girl who had to try so hard just to feel accepted. It wasn't until one afternoon in our math class that I realized just how much I had been holding on to these feelings of insecurity. That day, we were working on a group project, and I was partnered with Jack, the same boy who had been kind to me when Julian made his cruel remarks. Jack had become one of my friends, though he still wasn't quite as close as Maya or Tristan. He was nice to me, but there was something about him that made me feel like I was still on the outside, like I wasn't really part of the group. It was a feeling I couldn't explain, but I always had it when I was around him. As we worked together on the project, I noticed that Jack wasn't really paying attention to me. He was focused on his own work, making notes on the paper in front of him. I tried to ask him a question about the project, but he barely acknowledged me. It wasn't that he was being rude. It was just that he seemed distracted, and I felt invisible. It was a feeling I had gotten used to, but that didn't make it hurt any less. "Jack," I said again, trying to catch his attention, "do you understand what we're supposed to do next?" He looked up at me, his face blank for a moment, and then he nodded. "Yeah, I think so," he said, his voice distant. I felt a pang of frustration. Why was it so hard to connect with people sometimes? Why did it always feel like I had to work so hard to make them see me, to make them care? I tried to focus on the project, but my mind kept wandering. I started thinking about the other kids in the class, the ones who were so confident, so comfortable in their friendships. I saw them laughing together, passing notes, and I couldn't help but feel like I was on the outside looking in. I wasn't part of that world, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't change that. The bell rang, signaling the end of the class, and I gathered my things quickly. I didn't want to stay there longer than I had to. I could feel my throat tighten, the familiar ache of loneliness creeping up again. Maya and Tristan were waiting for me outside the classroom, and I forced a smile when I saw them. They didn't seem to notice how off I felt, and maybe that was a good thing. I didn't want to burden them with my thoughts, didn't want them to think I was ungrateful for their friendship. But as we walked to the next class, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still trying to fit into a world that wasn't made for me. At lunch that day, Maya noticed that I seemed quieter than usual. "Lena, what's wrong?" she asked. Her voice filled with concern. "You've been kind of distant all day." I hesitated, not sure if I should say anything. I didn't want to sound like I was complaining, like I was ungrateful for the friends I had. But I couldn't keep it inside any longer. "I don't know," I said quietly, pushing my food around on my plate. "It's just, sometimes I feel like I don't belong here. Like no matter how hard I try, I'm never really part of things." Maya's face softened, and she put her hand on mine. Lena, you do belong. You belong with us. I know it's tough, but you've got to know that we're here for you. We see you for who you really are, not just how you look. I nodded, grateful for her words, but they didn't completely ease the pain. I wanted so badly to believe her, to feel like I truly belonged. But there were still too many moments where I felt like I was invisible. I wasn't sure how to fix it, how to make the world around me see me the way Maya and Tristan did. The rest of the week passed in a haze of ups and downs. Some days were good. I spent time with Maya and Tristan, talking about books and making jokes. Other days, like the one in math class, were harder. I still struggled with the feeling that I wasn't fully accepted, that no matter how much I tried, I was always going to be different. But one thing I had started to realize was that it wasn't just about what the other kids thought of me. It was about how I saw myself. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone. I didn't need to fit into their world. I was enough, just as I was. That night, after school, I sat down to talk to Mom. I hadn't told her much about how school was going, but I could tell she was concerned. She always knew when something was wrong. "Lena," she said, sitting next to me on the couch, "you've been quiet lately. Are you okay?" I took a deep breath and nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was okay. "I'm just tired, Mom. Tired of trying to fit in." Mom looked at me for a moment, her expression soft and understanding. "Sweetheart, you don't have to fit in. You're perfect just the way you are. You don't need to change for anyone." Her words made something click inside me. Maybe I didn't have to fight so hard to fit into a world that didn't understand me. Maybe the real challenge wasn't fitting in. It was accepting myself. Once I did that, everything else would start to fall into place. I smiled at Mom, feeling a little lighter. "Thanks, Mom," I said, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in days. The journey wasn't over, but I was starting to feel like I was on the right path. I wasn't perfect, and school wasn't going to suddenly become easy. But I knew now that I didn't have to face it alone. I had my family, I had my friends, and most importantly, I had myself. Chapter 8: Improvement and Growth. By the time the second month of school had passed, I could feel something starting to shift within me. It wasn't an overnight transformation, and it wasn't as dramatic as I had hoped, but I could feel myself changing, slowly but surely. The sting of the stares and whispers that had once consumed me no longer held as much power. It wasn't that I was immune to them. It still hurt when people looked at me like I was different. But I had started to realize that I didn't need to let their opinions define me. I had found a rhythm. School wasn't as overwhelming anymore, and I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering who was staring at me. I had my routine now, my friends, and for the first time, I felt like I was making progress. It wasn't just about surviving the days anymore. I was starting to enjoy them, starting to feel like I belonged. One of the things that had helped me grow the most was my friendship with Maya and Tristan. They had become my safe place. We would walk to class together, sit together at lunch, and talk about everything from our favorite books to the strange things that happened in class. They had a way of making me feel like I wasn't the odd one out anymore, like I was just another kid trying to figure things out, just like everyone else. But it wasn't just my friends who had made a difference. I had been pushing myself, too. I had always been hesitant about my academic abilities, particularly in subjects like math and science. I had spent so much of my time focusing on the things I couldn't control, like how I looked and how others saw me, that I had neglected to put the effort into areas that I could actually improve. Math, for instance, had always been a challenge for me. I had never been particularly good at numbers, and the thought of doing math homework had always filled me with dread. But one day, while working on an assignment with Maya in the library, something clicked. She had been explaining a concept to me that I had been struggling with, and suddenly it made sense. I could feel the gears turning in my brain, and for the first time, I realized that I wasn't as bad at math as I had always believed. "See?" Maya said, noticing my surprised expression. "You're getting it. You just needed to work through it a little bit more." I smiled, feeling a small sense of pride swell inside me. It wasn't that I had become a math genius overnight, but I had made progress. I had learned to push past the mental block I had created for myself, and that was a huge victory in my book. Over the next few weeks, I continued to work on my studies. I started setting aside time every day to focus on my homework, even if it meant staying up a little later than usual. Slowly but surely, I began to notice a difference. I was understanding concepts more clearly, and my grades were improving, too. It felt like I was finally getting the hang of school, like I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. But the real breakthrough came one afternoon during a science experiment. We were working in groups, and I was paired with Tristan and Jack. We had to build a small project involving chemical reactions, and I was feeling a little out of my element. I had always thought of myself as more of a reader than a scientist, and I wasn't sure how I would contribute to the experiment. But Tristan was patient with me, explaining the steps and guiding me through each part of the project. Jack, who was always the more reserved of the two, gave me a nod of encouragement whenever I got stuck. Together, we managed to get the reaction just right. When it finally worked and the mixture bubbled up, I felt a sense of accomplishment that I had never expected. "See?" Tristan said, grinning. "You're a natural." I laughed, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I don't know about natural, but I'm getting there." That moment was a turning point. It wasn't just about passing a test or getting a good grade. It was about realizing that I had more potential than I had ever given myself credit for. I wasn't just the girl with a strange face. I was capable of more than I had ever believed. It wasn't just school where I was making strides. Over the next few weeks, I started to feel more comfortable in my own skin. I didn't feel the constant need to hide away or avoid situations where I might be judged. When I walked into a room, I no longer felt like everyone's eyes were immediately on me. I still had those moments, those fleeting moments when I felt like an outsider, but they didn't define me anymore. One of the things I started doing was looking at myself differently. Instead of focusing on the things I didn't like about my appearance, I began focusing on the things that made me proud. I liked the way my eyes sparkled when I laughed. I liked the way my hair curled when it got just the right amount of humidity. I liked the way my hands moved when I wrote, how my fingers danced across the pages. I was starting to see myself as more than just my face. That shift in perspective made all the difference. I stopped seeing myself as a person who needed to be fixed. I started seeing myself as a person who had value, no matter how I looked or how others perceived me. Of course, there were still struggles. There were still days when I felt like I didn't belong, when the weight of the world pressed down on me a little too hard. But I had learned something important in those months. I had learned that growth doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, everyday moments. It happens when you push through the hard times and keep going, even when you don't feel like it. And the people around me, my family, my friends, and even the teachers who supported me, had played a huge role in that growth. Mom, especially, had been a constant source of encouragement. Whenever I felt like giving up, she would remind me of my worth, reminding me that I was capable of more than I could imagine. One evening, after I had completed a particularly challenging homework assignment, Mom came into my room to check on me. "How's it going, Lena?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. "I finished my math homework," I said, grinning. "It was hard, but I did it." Mom's face lit up. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I knew you could do it. You've come so far since the first day of school." I felt a surge of pride. It wasn't just about the homework. It was about everything I had overcome to get to this point. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first walked into Riverside Academy. I wasn't just the girl with the face everyone stared at. I was more than that. I was someone who could achieve, someone who could grow and improve no matter the challenges. The next day, when I walked into school, I held my head a little higher. I still had moments of doubt, moments when I felt like I wasn't enough. But I knew now that I was capable of handling whatever came my way. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. And that, I realized, was the most important kind of growth. Chapter 9. School Play. The school play had been a topic of conversation for weeks before it finally arrived. The excitement in the air was palpable as everyone talked about their roles, the practices, and the performances. The play was going to be a big deal. It wasn't just a small classroom performance. This was going to be a full production, with costumes, props, and rehearsals that would take up a good portion of our afternoons. For most students, the play was something they had looked forward to for months. But for me, it was something I both dreaded and secretly hoped for. I had never been involved in a school play before. The thought of standing in front of an audience, performing in front of my peers, filled me with a mix of excitement and terror. I had always been a quiet person, the one who sat on the sidelines, watching everyone else do the talking and performing. But something about this play, about the possibility of finally doing something that would make me stand out in a good way, intrigued me. It was the perfect opportunity to prove to myself that I wasn't defined by the things I couldn't control. As the audition notices went up on the school bulletin board, I found myself staring at them, hesitating. Should I audition? Was I brave enough to do it? Part of me wanted to hide, to step back and avoid the whole thing. But another part of me, an unfamiliar part, wanted to take a chance. Maybe this would be my moment to prove that I wasn't just the girl who stood in the background, but someone who could shine, someone who could be seen for the right reasons. I decided to go for it. The day of auditions came, and I felt a pit in my stomach the entire day. I had spent the morning practicing my lines in front of the mirror, trying to get the emotions right, but I was still nervous. What if I messed up? What if everyone laughed? I didn't know if I could handle that kind of attention. I had spent so much time trying to avoid being the center of attention, and now here I was, about to put myself in the spotlight. When the bell rang for auditions, I followed the other students into the gymnasium where the casting was being held. Mr. Davenport, the drama teacher, was standing at the front, a clipboard in his hand, ready to call names. He was known for being fair but strict, and there was a certain air of authority around him that made me even more nervous. The line to A audition seemed endless. One by one, students went up to read their lines, their voices projecting clearly through the gym. Some of them were confident, others were nervous, but they all seemed so at ease in a way I couldn't manage. I could feel my palms getting sweaty as I waited. When it was finally my turn, I could barely breathe. "Lena, you're up," Mr. Davenport called, looking over his glasses at me. I took a deep breath and stood up, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on me. I walked to the front, trying to remind myself that I had practiced this. I had worked hard, and now I just needed to trust myself. Mr. Davenport handed me the script, and I glanced at the lines in front of me. They were from one of the main roles in the play. I hadn't expected to be given such a big part, but here I was, holding the script with my heart racing in my chest. "Whenever you're ready," Mr. Davenport said, nodding at me. I closed my eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and started reading. As the words flowed from my mouth, I suddenly felt a shift inside me. I wasn't just reading the lines, I was feeling them. I was becoming the character. I could almost hear the voices of the other students fade away as I focused on what I was doing. It was as if I had stepped into a new world where I wasn't defined by how I looked, but by what I could do. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. I wasn't just Lena, the girl with a strange face. I was an actress, playing a role, telling a story. When I finished, I opened my eyes and looked around. There was silence for a moment, and then Mr. Davenport nodded slowly, a small smile on his face. "Good work, Lena," he said. "We'll be in touch soon." I walked back to my seat, trying to hide the smile that was threatening to spread across my face. I had done it. I had stood up in front of everyone, and I hadn't fallen apart. I hadn't let my insecurities stop me from doing something I really wanted to do. And for that, I was proud. A week later, the cast list went up. My heart was pounding as I walked toward the bulletin board with the other students. I didn't dare look until I was standing in front of it, my hands shaking as I searched for my name. And there it was, Lena, listed as one of the main characters. I had gotten the part. I could hardly believe it. I wanted to scream, to jump up and down, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself. Instead, I just stood there, grinning like a fool, as the excitement bubbled up inside me. "See?" Maya said, appearing beside me. "Told you you'd get it." "I can't believe it," I said, my voice full of disbelief. "I'm actually going to be in the play." Maya grinned, giving me a high five. "You were amazing at the audition. You're going to be great." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of rehearsals. I spent my afternoons in the drama room with the rest of the cast, going over lines, practicing movements, and learning about blocking and stage direction. It was all so new to me, but it felt like I was becoming part of something important. As the days passed, I grew more comfortable on stage, and even though I still felt a little nervous every time we rehearsed in front of the whole group, I was starting to find my confidence. The best part of the whole experience, though, was the way I started to connect with the other kids in the cast. I had been nervous at first, unsure of how they would treat me, but they welcomed me with open arms. Sophie was in the play too, and she made sure to check in with me whenever I seemed nervous. Tristan would joke around during rehearsals, making me laugh and helping me feel more relaxed. And even Jack, who had been distant at times, started showing more interest in our practices. He would help me with my lines when I stumbled, and he even gave me a few tips on how to project my voice better. The weeks leading up to the performance were exhausting, but exhilarating. The costumes were being finalized, the set was coming together, and everything was slowly falling into place. Every rehearsal felt like a step closer to the big day. I could feel the excitement building, and even though I was still a little nervous, I couldn't wait to be on that stage, to show everyone that I wasn't just the girl they whispered about. I was someone who had a voice, a story to tell. Finally, the night of the performance arrived. The auditorium was packed with parents, teachers, and students, all waiting for the show to begin. Backstage, the air was thick with anticipation. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I stood with the rest of the cast, waiting for the curtain to rise. I had practiced for this moment, and now it was time to show everyone what I was capable of. When the curtain finally went up, I walked onto the stage with the rest of the cast. The lights shone down on us, and for a moment, I was blinded by the intensity of them. But then I took a deep breath and remembered everything I had practiced. I remembered that this was my moment, and I wasn't going to let it pass me by. Spoke my lines with confidence, and as the play went on, I found myself getting lost in the character. I was no longer thinking about how I looked or how nervous I felt. I was just the character, telling the story. And as I looked out into the audience, I realized something important. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the girl who was ignored or whispered about. I was someone who was seen, who mattered. The play ended to thunderous applause, and as the curtain fell, I stood there, beaming with pride. I had done it. I had faced my fears, stepped out of my comfort zone, and had one of the most incredible experiences of my life. I had proven to myself that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined, and in that moment, I knew I was no longer just the girl with a face that made people stare. I was Lena, a performer, a friend, and someone who had the strength to rise above it all. Chapter 10. Graduation. The final days of school had arrived. It felt surreal, like time had sped up, and before I knew it, I was standing at the edge of something huge. Graduation. The end of the year wasn't just a mark of finishing a grade. It was a symbol of how far I had come. The girl who walked into Riverside Academy a few months ago, nervous and unsure of herself, was not the same person I was today. The girl standing here, waiting for her graduation ceremony to begin, had grown, learned, and overcome challenges that once felt insurmountable. In the weeks leading up to graduation, there had been so much to do. We had exams to prepare for, final projects to finish, and countless hours of rehearsal for the ceremony. It wasn't just about academics anymore. It was about reflecting on everything that had happened and how it had shaped me into the person I had become. As the day of the ceremony drew closer, I felt a wave of mixed emotions. There was excitement, of course. Graduating was a big achievement, something I had worked hard for. But there was also a little sadness. Saying goodbye to Riverside Academy meant leaving behind the friends I had made, the teachers who had helped me, and the comfort of the familiar routines I had come to rely on. I knew high school would bring new challenges, new people, and a new chapter. But it was hard to imagine life without the friends I had grown so close to. One of the things I had been most nervous about was the speech. Each year, the students selected a representative to give a speech at the graduation ceremony, and this year, I had been chosen. I had been surprised when I heard the news. Me? The quiet girl who spent most of her time avoiding attention? It seemed like a joke, a mistake. But as soon as the initial shock wore off, I realized it was a huge honor. It was a chance to speak to everyone, to share my story, and to show them just how far I had come. I spent days writing the speech, rewriting it over and over again. I wanted to make sure I said the right things, that I captured everything I had learned during my time at Riverside. It wasn't just about thanking people or talking about how school had been. It was about sharing the journey I had taken, the struggles I had faced, and the lessons I had learned. I wanted to inspire the people who had been by my side, to show them that they weren't alone, that we all had the strength to overcome our fears. The night before the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, going over my speech in my head for what felt like the 100th time. What if I messed up? What if I forgot my lines? What if everyone could tell how nervous I was? The doubts crept in, as they always did before something important. But then, I thought about everything I had overcome. I thought about all the times I had wanted to run away, to quit, to hide. And yet here I was, standing on the edge of something amazing. I had made it this far, and I wasn't going to let fear stop me now. The next morning, I woke up early, my nerves still buzzing in the pit of my stomach. I got dressed in my graduation gown, a deep shade of blue that made me feel a little more official, a little more grown up. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't see the girl who had walked into Riverside months ago. I saw someone different, a girl who had faced her fears, who had made mistakes, who had learned and grown through it all. And it felt good. Maya, Tristan, and I met outside before the ceremony. We had all dressed up for the occasion, our gowns flowing behind us as we made our way toward the stage area. The atmosphere was buzzing with excitement as students and their families filled the seats in the auditorium. Parents were chatting, teachers were greeting students, and the air was filled with a sense of accomplishment. "Are you ready for your speech?" Maya asked, grinning at me. I smiled back, though I could feel my palms sweating. "I think so. I just hope I don't mess it up." "You'll be amazing," Tristan said, giving me a reassuring pat on the back. "We've all seen how much you've grown. This is your moment." I nodded, grateful for their support. Maya and Tristan had been my pillars throughout this entire journey. They had believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself, and I knew that their encouragement had helped me get to this point. The ceremony began, and as the seats filled, I found myself standing backstage, waiting for my turn. The other students were performing their roles. Some were singing, some were giving speeches, and others were receiving awards for their achievements. But my mind was on the speech I had to give. My heart was pounding and my thoughts raced. I glanced over at Mr. Davenport, who gave me a small, reassuring nod from the side of the stage. It was finally time. The announcer called my name, and I walked out onto the stage, my steps slower than I would have liked. The bright lights hit me as I stood in front of the microphone looking out at the sea of faces in the audience. The nerves were overwhelming at first, but I took a deep breath, remembered everything I had worked for, and started to speak. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice shaky at first, but gaining strength with every word. "I'm Lena, and I'm honored to stand here today as one of your graduating students. When I first came to Riverside Academy, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I was ready for all the challenges that would come my way, and honestly, I didn't think I'd be standing here today, ready to graduate with all of you. I paused, letting the words sink in. The room was quiet, the audience listening intently. I could feel the weight of their attention, but it didn't scare me as much as it had before. This was my moment. This was my chance to share my story. School wasn't always easy for me, I continued. There were days when I felt like I didn't belong, days when I wondered if I was ever going to fit in, days when I doubted myself. But those days have taught me something important. They've taught me that growth isn't always easy, and it doesn't always happen the way we expect it to. It happens in small steps, in moments when we don't give up, even when things get hard, and the people around us, our friends, our family, our teachers, help us grow in ways we can't always see. I glanced over at Maya and Tristan, who were sitting in the front row, smiling at me. They had been with me every step of the way, and I couldn't have done it without them. Thank you to everyone who has supported me along this journey, I said, my voice steady now. You've made all the difference, and I will never forget the kindness and encouragement you've given me. I've learned that it's okay to be different, that our differences make us stronger, and that we all have the power to rise above our fears. The applause was louder than I had expected. The room erupted in cheers, and for the first time I felt truly seen. I wasn't the girl who used to hide behind her insecurities. I wasn't the girl who was afraid of standing out. I was Lena, a young woman who had learned to embrace her strength, her flaws, and her potential. As I walked off the stage, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had done it. I had stood up in front of everyone and shared my story. I had faced my fears, and I had succeeded. After the ceremony, we all gathered outside for pictures and to celebrate. There were hugs, laughs, and a few tears as we said goodbye to the teachers who had helped us along the way, the classmates who had become our friends. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt ready to face it. Lena, you were amazing, Maya said, giving me a hug. I'm so proud of you. You did great, Tristan added, clapping me on the back. And in that moment, as I stood there with my friends, I realized something important. Graduation wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning of a new chapter. I had grown, I had improved, and I was ready to take on whatever came next. Great work today. Every moment you spend practicing brings you closer to mastering your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, progress comes with patience and consistency. If this story inspired you or helped you in your learning journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Easy English Spark channel for more lessons and stories. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your growth. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and keep shining.